How to comfort someone who is grieving. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Matters That Matter. I'm Simran and I'm in a conversation with my mentor, Suzy Singh. Suzy, we're living through very difficult times at the moment, both personally and as a collective. And so many people have lost their loved ones due to this pandemic. So many people are grieving the loss of something or the other, if not particularly people. And I feel like at this point of time, it's so important to discuss grief and how to go about the whole process of grieving. Today, I want to particularly discuss how to comfort people around you who are going through the process of grieving, because often I feel that people get very awkward. I mean, personally also, this is something that I've experienced, that when somebody around me is in pain, I just don't know how to approach them or how to comfort them or what to say, and people can be dismissive out of the purest intentions at this time. So can you tell us a little bit about how we can comfort someone who's grieving without minimizing or dismissing their pain?
This is a really important question in the current circumstances, Simran. So thank you for bringing it up. I think the first important thing is to recognize what is our aim in approaching them. And is it that we want to apologize for what happened?
Mhm.
Is it that we want to do the mandatory condolence? Is it that we really want to partake of their pain? I think a lot of times when we are feeling awkward, it's because we are not sure what role we ought to be playing. And
Mhm.
once we have clarity on that, then it will help us dispel some of the awkwardness. So the key aim when we are in the presence of someone or when we meet someone or reach out to someone who's had a recent loss is to be able to provide them a safe space where they can be vulnerable, where they can share something if they wish to, where they can feel that they can be very naked with their pain and that they will be understood in exactly the right way. And there is no judgment, there is no pretenses, there is no um, tick marks where people are just offering condolence for the sake of marking their presence at a certain event. So if you can be at your most authentic and your most vulnerable self, when you reach out to someone, you will automatically bring that safe space to them. So just tell yourself when you're reaching out to someone in this state that I am choosing to connect with them, to offer this safe space of vulnerability. And for that, I need to open my heart. I need to be ready to experience their pain. Then everything will flow very naturally. And that brings me to the second point, that very often our awkwardness is also linked to a subliminal fear of having to connect with our own suppressed losses in the past and our own repressed grief, and we don't want to do it. So
Mhm.
something actually wants to escape it. If we had a choice, or if we are given a choice, we'll actually say, um, is there any way I can avoid getting in touch with this person till they are feeling better? And which is where this whole idea of marking your presence then comes in, because the logic tells you no. How can you not be there for your friend or for a dear relative or a cousin at this point in time? So logic is coaxing you to go ahead and establish contact. The fear of experiencing your own grief is withholding you because you're terrified of experiencing your pain and then
Mhm.
to act with their pain. But if you remind yourself that it's okay for me to also be in touch with my pain, because if I can connect with my pain, it will make it easier for the other person. But this act takes courage. If you are offering an authentic condolence, then the act definitely requires you to be vulnerable and open with your own past grief.
So, sometimes, Suzy, and like I've experienced this very recently also, that, you know, a lot of my friends are going through COVID, and, there are the situations in their families are not very good. And I personally also feel sometimes that, what do I say? Like, I know this person is suffering and I deeply care for them and I want to be there for them, but I just don't know how to be there for them. I know that it is going to take the time it is going to take and that I cannot do anything about it, but I do want to talk to them and I do want to be there. And there is also this fear, like you said, that I don't want to hurt them more, or I don't know what the right thing to say is. I struggle with words a lot, and I feel like a lot of people also struggle with the language of grief. How do you talk to someone? We don't know. So how can someone navigate this situation where you want to be there for someone but you just don't understand what is the right thing to say, how much is the right amount to be with someone, how much is the right amount to let them be on their own, all of these just nitty gritties of it.
So I think some safe conversation openers are simply to say, I can only imagine how hard this must be for you. Now, here the words are very carefully selected. I can only imagine. So I'm not saying I know what you're going through. I'm not saying that I can't even imagine what you're going through, because that can also be very upsetting. That, the person can go on the defense saying that, are you saying you've never had a loss? And it's safe to say, I can only imagine, which then gives the other person the feeling that you're trying to connect, you're trying to reach out to them, you're trying to put yourself in their shoes. The second thing you can do is to actually just say that, I'm terribly sorry about what you're going through presently. And it's also important to follow that up with, I really want to be there for you. I'm here. Is there anything that you'd like to say about, and then name the person, if it's your parent who's passed or your father, what is the most difficult experience that you are struggling with right now? What really happened? So we can be very terrified about bringing this up, thinking that it's going to trigger their pain. But it's been tested in experiments that when people are given the opportunity to repeatedly express their pain, the pain doesn't become more, the pain reduces. And in a psychological perspective, we call this desensitization, that when we want someone to overcome a deep fear or a phobia, then we actually help them experience that fear repeatedly, and their fear decreases gradually with every exposure. So similarly, every time that we allow them an opportunity to talk about their loss, they are actually able to reduce the degree of grief that they are feeling, because they are able to express it. They may, in the process of expressing it, they may have some internal breakthroughs, connecting the dots about something which was a mystery or a question mark to them. They may realize why something is troubling them so deeply. For example, maybe while they're speaking, they might just say, why didn't I ever tell my father that I loved him so much? And then okay, so there is a regret. And then you can guide them further, that, you can do ABC and whatever. That's a separate conversation about the tools that can be provided to work through the grief if there are some regrets. So allowing them to say whatever they're experiencing will actually help the other person. I think instead of having some ready-made icebreakers or conversation openers, the most important thing is simply to connect with your heart, connect with your own past grief and pain, and that automatically equips you to be in a very authentic space with that individual.
So that leads me to this very question that not a question, but this is my experience also, looking at people around me and how they deal with grief. And often I find that grief or pain is generally repressed. If a family is going through grief, the elders often say that it's okay, be strong or get over it. And that could probably also be because, like you mentioned, that they have their own fears of not being able to face their pain and it getting overwhelming for them. So I want you to talk a little bit about the harmful effects of saying those things to someone, and is there a timeline of grief? Is there only a set amount of period that people need to grieve for, and then it just gets over? And like these misconceptions about grief that people have. And also, how can people who have these fears of facing their pain while assisting somebody else, while holding space for somebody else, face their own fears of letting themselves also grieve in the process if it gets activated?
So I think these are some of the don't do's, which is trying to hurry grief is probably a very common error. And I want to emphasize that it's an error, because what you are actually telling the other person is that you are doing a poor job of it and that you should actually wear your mask and get back into the battlefield. And that's not what you want to tell someone who has lost somebody who is emotionally, psychologically, spiritually a part of them. Just as after a major surgery, you need time to recuperate and become healthy. Similarly, when you've lost someone who is meaningful to you, it is very important that you decide how much time you need before you feel better. And I don't think the word decide is correct. I think you need to allow yourself the time to feel better. So you will go through days, the person who the bereaved person who's lost someone will go through days when they'll actually feel, wow, I'm feeling so much better today, and maybe I've gotten over it. But 3 days later, they are going to go back into excruciating grief again, which they don't know. So it is very mercurial, the experience. It's here today, tomorrow, and then it comes back with a larger whiplash. So grief cannot be hurried. If I were to give a ballpark figure, I would say people should be allowed 1 year to be able to deal with their grief. And the reason I say 1 year is because if it lasts longer than a year, then they're most likely getting into a state of complicated grief and they need medical attention. Then leaving it to them to deal with it on their own is not suggested. They should reach out for a counselor's help so that something is blocking their ability, their natural ability to reacclimatize to the changed circumstances, and they need assistance to overcome it or to deal with it effectively. So don't try and hurry it. That's the first thing. The second thing is very often we think that because we want to help them, we should try and cheer them up. And that again is an error, because you can't cheer up someone who has lost something so valuable.
So the idea is not to cheer them up. The idea is not to help them get back to normal. The idea is to help them connect with their grief and feel it fully. So how can you help them honor that grief? That is important. Also, I think sometimes in trying to be helpful, people generalize and they say, yes, everybody is going through
Hmm.
such a hard time. And that again is an error because, people don't care about what the world is going through when they're going through such an intimate loss. And generalizing lands in their listening like what you're going through is no big deal,
Yeah.
but it is a big deal for them.
Hmm.
So these are things that we should avoid doing. And I think what is suggested as to do's is invite them to open up and talk about their grief. So you can ask them, would you like to talk about mama? Would you like to talk about um, what are the things you wish you'd done for them? Do you feel what was the worst part about losing them? What are the thoughts and images that you're struggling with in your mind and that are not going away? Because very often, when people lose people in the current circumstances, I find a lot of people telling me we can't get the images of that moment we rushed them to the hospital and the
Hmm.
chaos in trying to get them an oxygen cylinder. Those are very traumatic images, and they are anchored in their mind. So helping them talk about that will allow them to release it, to overcome it. And so invite them to talk about the difficulty of grief in their minds.
Hmm.
Another thing that I find as a suggestion, which may be valuable if you find that they're very closed off, if they don't want to share, if they don't want to express, because we must respect their silence too. Sometimes when people are really numb and they don't want to talk, we must honor that space. And with such people, I think it's beneficial if we just ask them the simple question: is it okay if I pray with you right now for your mother, if the mother is the deceased, as an example? And what are the things that you should pray for? I find some of the common concerns people have in the days after a loved one passes is, have they made the safe journey through the afterlife? Are they happy? Are they healthy? Are they missing me? Those kind of questions. So convert that into a reassuring prayer. And you can just in that moment, whether you are on a video call, whether you are on the telephone, just pray and say things like, I pray, and name the deceased or name the relationship. Say, I pray that your mama may swiftly and safely travel into the afterlife. I pray that she may have an easy journey. I pray that she may be happy and healthy and find great peace. I pray that she may be able to be free of all her worldly concerns, anxieties, and worries. Now, if you notice, what that does is, of course, that prayerful environment will allow them to feel reassured. You're also addressing their active concerns and kind of offering solace in a very, very indirect but prayerful way that all is well with the deceased.
Hmm.
So this is another very useful suggestion. And
Right.
act of prayer with your friend or whoever you are trying to comfort.
Like you said, there is no timeline or there is no fixed time that we need to grieve. You just have to see your own process through it. And I have felt that in my experience with grief as well, that it's not just 1 year, that grief hits you in waves and in layers. It's not that you're just done with it once. You might be done with it once, and then after 2 years or after 1 year, another layer hits you all over again, and then you're just in that space all over again. But I think it's not very popular to talk about this, the fact that grief probably never leaves you. You just learn to make a space for it inside you and allow it whenever it arrives again. Is that your experience as well, Suzy? Because I mean, that's certainly been my experience with grieving the loss of a loved one, even after years.
The funny thing is that the reason that happens, Simran, is because we do not express and process our grief sufficiently.
Okay.
Traditionally, we've all been sort of, I don't know where it comes from, but we feel we should not express our grief openly because we don't want to upset or hurt somebody around us, or we
Mm,
need to be strong, or we need to be there for others, or if we break down, then they'll break down too. And all of these ideas make us repress our grief. That also makes it easier for us.
mm,
And it also then allows us to keep expanding our hearts. Because when you're able to work through your grief effectively, you experience an expansion in your capacity to love, and your compassion quota just increases. It happens spontaneously and naturally. Whereas when you do the reverse, when you repress your grief,
mhm,
your ability to hold love shrinks, much like how the arteries in the heart get calcified
mm,
and become narrow, and you experience a heart attack. People who store their grief, they end up with two kinds of problems. You either have a lung disease or you have a heart disease. And if you notice today in the pandemic, these are
yeah.
the two organs that are most affected. And you find that people who are dying with COVID, either they recover from COVID and then they have a post COVID complication of the lungs or the heart. And that's because the burden of grief on the planet has become too much to bear, the collective grief.
Mhm.
And which is why this is also at this point an invitation to everyone that please work through the grief that you're carrying. And it's not just the grief of losing loved ones, but it is also the grief of everything else that you may have lost in your life. You may have lost the feeling of worthiness. You may have lost the love of someone that you loved dearly. You may be heartbroken. You may be divorced. You may have lost the respect you sought from somebody. Grief comes in so many shapes and sizes.
Yes.
And when we don't work on it, when we don't allow ourselves the luxury of dressing it and are impatient to get back to life so that we can forget it,
Mm,
we don't have to deal with it, then we create uh, terrible suffering for ourselves in the future and also for the planet.
I think, Suzy, the book you mentioned is something that, in my opinion, the planet really needs right now, all of us really need. And I've just discovered that I have some processing to do after all when it comes to my own personal grief in life. Grief is so intricately woven into our lives. And I think that if there is something that people should take away from this video is that they need to allow themselves and others around them to break down, and that is okay, and to take their time with it. I hope this video helps everyone who watches it. If you find it helpful, then please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.